everyone. Recently, a very dear friend of mine was going through a difficult time, so I sent her these voice messages of short stories that make you see the world in a different perspective. And after sending them, I realized that other people might want or need to hear these short stories so that they can gain insight and lend the power of these stories. So I'm going to read two of them. One is from Chicken Soup for the Unsinkable Soul, and the other is from Chicken Soup for the Soul. So starting with the first one. The first short story is called Growing Roots by Philip Gully. Growing Roots. When I was growing up, I had an old neighbor named Dr. Gibbs. He didn't look like any doctor I'd ever known. Every time I saw him, he wore denim overalls and a straw hat, the front brim of which was green sunglass plastic. He smiled a lot, a smile that matched his hat, old and crinkly and well-worn. He never yelled at us for playing in his yard. I remember him as someone who was a lot nicer than the circumstances warranted. When Dr. Gibbs wasn't saving lives, he was planting trees. His house sat on 10 acres, and his life's goal was to make it a forest. The good doctor had some interesting theories concerning plant husbandry. He had come from the no pain, no gain school of horticulture. He never watered his new trees, which flew in the face of conventional wisdom. Once I asked why. He said that watering plants spoiled them, and that if you water them, each successive tree generation will grow weaker and weaker. So you have to make things rough for them to weed out the weedy trees early on. He talked about how watering trees made for shallow roots, and how trees that weren't watered had to grow deep roots in search of moisture. I took him to mean that deep roots were to be treasured. So he never watered his trees. He'd plant an oak, and instead of watering it every morning, he'd beat it with the rolled up newspaper. Smack, slap, pow. I asked him why he did that, and he said it was to get the tree's attention. Dr. Gibbs went to glory a couple of years after I left home. Every now and then I'd walk by his house and look at the trees that I'd watched him plant some 25 years ago. They're granite strong now, big and robust. Those trees wake up in the morning and beat their chests and drink their coffee black. I planted a couple of trees a few years back, carried water for them for a solid summer, sprayed them, prayed over them, the whole 9 yards. 2 years of coddling has resulted in trees that expect to be weighted on hand and foot. Whenever a cold wind blows in, they tremble and chatter their branches. Sissy trees. Funny thing about those trees of Dr. Gibbs, adversity and deprivation seemed to benefit them in ways comfort and ease never could. Every night before I go to bed, I check on my 2 sons. I stand over them and watch their little bodies, the rising and falling of life within. I often pray for them. Mostly, I pray that their lives will be easy. Lord, spare them from hardship. But lately, I've been thinking that it's time to change my prayer. This change has to do with the inevitability of cold winds that hit us at the core. I know my children are going to encounter hardship, and praying they won't is naive. There's always a cold wind blowing somewhere. So I'm changing my eventide prayer. Because life is tough, whether we want it to be or not. Instead, I'm going to pray that my sons' roots grow deep, so that they can draw strength from the hidden sources of the eternal God. Too many times we pray for ease, but that's a prayer seldom met. What we need to do is pray for roots that reach deep into the eternal. So when the rains fall and the winds blow, we won't be swept asunder. So that was the first short story. The second short story is called The Golden Buddha by Jack Canfield. The Golden Buddha. In the fall of 1988, my wife Georgia and I were invited to give a presentation on self-esteem and peak performance at a conference in Hong Kong. Since we had never been to the Far East before, we decided to extend our trip and visit Thailand. When we arrived in Bangkok, we decided to take a tour of the city's most famous Buddhist temples. Along with our interpreter and driver, Georgia and I visited numerous Buddhist temples that day, but after a while they all began to blur in our memories. However, there is one temple that left an indelible impression in our hearts and minds. It is called the Temple of the Golden Buddha. The temple itself is very small, probably no longer than 30 feet by 30 feet. But as we entered, we were stunned by the presence of a 10.5-foot tall solid gold Buddha. It weighs over 2.5 tons and is valued at approximately $196 million. It was quite an awesome sight, the kindly, gentle, yet imposing, solid gold Buddha smiling down at us. As we immersed ourselves in the normal sightseeing tasks, taking pictures while oohing and awing over the statue, I walked over to a glass case that contained a large piece of clay about 8 inches thick and 12 inches wide. Next to the glass case was a typewritten page describing the history of this magnificent piece of art. Back in 1957, a group of monks from a monastery had to relocate a clay Buddha from the temple to a new location. The monastery was to be relocated to a new room to make room for the development of a highway through Bangkok. When the crane began to lift the giant idol, the weight of it was so tremendous that it began to crack. What's more, rain began to fall. The head monk, who was concerned about damage to the sacred Buddha, decided to lower the statue back to the ground and cover it with a large canvas tarp to protect it from the rain. Later that evening, the head monk went to check on the Buddha. He shined his flashlight under the tarp to see if the Buddha was staying dry. As the light reached the crack, he noticed a little gleam shining back and thought it strange. As he took a closer look at this gleam of light, he wondered if there might be something underneath the clay. He went to fetch a chisel and hammer from the monastery and began to chip away at the clay. As he knocked off shards of clay, the little gleam grew brighter and bigger. Many hours of labor went by before the monk stood face to face with the extraordinary solid gold Buddha. Historians believe that several hundred years before the head monk's discovery, the Burmese army was about to invade Thailand, then called Siam. The Siamese monks, realizing that their country would soon be attacked, covered their precious Buddha with an outer covering of clay in order to keep their treasure from being looted by the Burmese. Unfortunately, it appears the Burmese slaughtered all the Siamese monks, and the well-kept secret of the golden Buddha remained intact until that fateful day in 1957. As we flew home on the Cathay Pacific Airlines, I began to think to myself, we are all like the clay Buddha covered with a shell of hardness created out of fear, and yet underneath each of us is a golden Buddha, a golden Christ, or a golden essence, which is our real self. Somewhere along the way, between the ages of 2 and 9, we begin to cover up our golden essence, our natural self. Much like the monk with the hammer and the chisel, our task now is to discover our true essence once again. That concludes my short story video, and I hope that whatever you guys are going through right now, or whatever you're not going through right now, you can power through all of it, and at the end you might be scathed, but you'll still be your improved, best version of yourself. Whatever life has in store for you, I hope that you always remember that even though things that happen to you are inevitable and out of your control, what you decide to do after those actions and what kind of person you aspire to be after facing those hardships and challenges is something that is in your reach and something that you can control. So I hope that you guys all remember that. And I hope best of luck to all of you, and that these short stories helped you maybe strengthen your view or gain a new insight on life. So yeah, good luck everyone.